Good morning, you guys. Peyton, are you straight on everything? I got your email. Um, I'll send you a message.
Yes, ma'am. I took everything. I just didn't know the matching part on the test.
That's fine. Don't worry about that. I was trying to see will it work. If it didn't work, that's fine. I'll just give you credit for it. So don't worry about
Okay,
it.
perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Guys, excuse the house. It may be a little messy because of a 2 and 3 year old. I'm gonna turn the camera off in a moment, and we're gonna get started. How were you guys' weekend, y'all? Were okay this weekend? Okay. Um, I assume the test went okay. I don't know why what is that? The respondents lockdown browser wasn't working that great. I have no idea. But I know some of you guys kind of figured it out and everything. But we're gonna move on. I'm gonna try to see if we can finish mostly all the chapters in the book. I know for the last few chapters of the book, I'm going to pre-record some stuff, and I'm just thankful now my internet is working great. I had to switch providers, and this is way better. Um, so I'm gonna try to pre-record the last 4 chapters for you guys, and everything. Because I know 18 and 20 they're real short, but the other chapters I'm gonna try to go through. I'm gonna probably give you guys a final exam study guide, hopefully by next week, so you guys know what to expect on the test. I'm just gonna put it as a PDF, and it's gonna have a lot of questions. As far as other things, discussions and everything, I am going to add a few more discussions that you guys can write up for some extra points and everything, because normally we discuss in class, but I am going to put some discussion questions on there for you guys to discuss as well. We are on to chapter number 11, dealing with hair and fibers. That's what we're going to talk about today. And with that, hair and fibers, they're very important. Um, a lot of time, usually having hair and fibers pretty much make or break a case. And a lot of times it really makes a case. Now, when you see hair, it is used in a wide variety of um, physical evidence, different types of crimes. Um, what has happened is um, what they use, why they use hair is because of the DNA. Because hair can provide such a good DNA match, one, and two, now, not only DNA, but drug analysis. I know now, for example, with my kids, when their parents would come to visit them, when they had their DHR visits, they took hair for drug testing. And that's how they found out that both of their parents had drugs in their system. They did hair. And I know with a lot of hair samples now with drug testing, they can go back up to 7 years to see what you've had in your system just by hair. And so that's what it is. Now, what it's saying here, you can't individualize human hair to a single head, but you can use it to characterize DNA. And that's what they do. Now, with hair, it can provide strong evidence. It could corroborate what was going on at the scene, and all of that of a particular crime. So hair is very important. Um, Now, what is hair and what's the definition of hair? When you talk about its morphology, it's an appendage of the skin that grows out of a organ known as the hair follicle. So yes, hair follicles are organs. And the length of the hair extends from the root of the bulb um, embedded in the follicle, continues into a shaft, and it terminates at a tip end. Now, the shaft has three layers. It has the cuticle, it has the cortex, and the medulla. Now, when you talk about a forensic scientist, they examine all of that. They want to take a look at that, and they look at that, and that's where they really find most of their evidence. Now, the cuticle is the structure covering of the exterior of the hair. The scales always point toward the tip of the hair. That's how you scale it back. And the scale pattern is useful for species identification. So that's what they use on the outside of the hair. They use the hair scale to identify what type of species the hair actually came from. Now, with the cuticle and the cortex, that's the main body of the hair shaft. Um, So why do they care about that? Okay, so when you look at the cortex and all of that, they're looking at the hair color. And so the hair color is very important. Now, uh, with hair color, you got granules that are pigments. Now, with those pigments, what you're looking at is that tells you the color. Now, it tells you color, the shape, the distribution of them. You know, even if the hair is dyed, they can look at that and they compare the hairs among different people. Now, this is a cross section showing hair growing out of a tube-like structure called the follicle. Now, the cornicle right here, it shows you how your hair actually stacks. So it shows you it stacks like paper cups. And so, like your hair, when it splits on the end and everything like that, that's how your hair is made. They got those, it look almost like scales. So it is scales, but those scales are stacked on one another like paper cups. Now, you can see the hair can be in different shapes. They can be in like these little shapes going out that you see here. They can be in petals, they can be in triangular shapes. It can be all different types of shapes for the hair follicle itself. Now, this is where you see cross-linking and then the overlapping scales. Now, overlapping scales and all of that stuff, when you look at hairs under microscopes, you can actually look and see what type of damage the hair may have had and all of that type of stuff. Now, moving on to the medulla. Now, the medulla is the cellular column running through the center of the hair. The medullary index measures the diameter of the medulla relative to the diameter of the hair shaft. Now, for humans, the medulla generally occupies less than 1/3 of the diameter of the shaft, while for animals, it's greater than 1/2. So, if you know the size of the medulla, you know whether or not you're dealing with human or animal. Now, the medulla can be continuous, it can be interrupted, it can be fragmented, or it can be absent. So, it can be any of those. Now, the presence of the medulla varies from individual to individual, even among hairs of a given individual. And then the medullae have different shapes depending on the species. Now, here goes some of the medulla patterns. You got continuous, you see the interrupted, and then you see the fragmented. Now, a very important part we talk about is the root of the hair. Now, the root and the other surrounding cells in the hair follicle provide the tools necessary to make sure the hair continue to grow or produce hair. So there are three phases of hair growth. You got the anagen, catagen, and telogen phase. Now, when pulled from the head, some translucent tissue surrounding the hair shaft near the root, you can find that. They call that a tag, and it's a follicular tag. By using DNA analysis on the follicular tag, the hair can be individualized. So that's how you can tell if the hair actually came from a certain person. Now, this is what you see. You see hair in the anagen phase, that is in A, B, the catagen phase, and then C, the telogen phase. And then at the telogen phase, what they did was magnify it 100 times. Now, we talked about in last chapter that we used a comparison microscope for comparing bullets, but you can also use the comparison microscope to compare hair fibers or compare hair and fibers. And so that's one of the things that the microscope is actually used for. So it's a tool for that. So scale structure, medullary index, the shape, they look at that especially for animal identification. Um, let's just say if somebody got bitten by a dog, for example, or something like that, or a dog was used in a crime. And that's one of the things that they will look at there. Now, when you compare the strains of human hair, what they're looking for color, length, and diameter of the hair strand. That's what they're looking for. Color, length, and diameter. Now, other things that they can look for is the presence or the absence of the medulla. They can look at the shape and color intensity of the pigment granules, presence in the cortex. So they can look for all of that in particularly. Now, why do they care about all of this? And that's mainly because they have to make sure that the evidence match up. And so they have to look at those different types of things. Now, the most common request is to determine whether or not the hairs recovered at the crime scene compares to the hair removed from the suspect. So if you got a suspect, what they're going to do is they're going to ask the suspect for different fibers, the hair fibers, the hairs, and and then even when they take it for a crime scene, a lot of the time they go into the bathroom or they look around the house to see if somebody have a hairbrush. That's what they want to do. They want to take the hairs and compare them. Now, when you're looking at hair under the microscope, this is where they say it tends to be subjective and highly dependent on the skills and the integrity of the analyst. For that reason, a reported hair comparison must contain DNA information. So when you're doing hair and fibers and all of that stuff, especially hair, you got to make sure you have DNA. Because if the DNA don't match, that evidence is going to be thrown out. So, questions that they're going to want to ask. Um, can the body area from which the hair originated, can that be determined? Uh, Racial origin can be determined. The age and the sex, can it be determined if the hair was removed forcibly from the person? So all of those questions they're going to ask, and that's got to be something that you know that has to be answered. Can that be answered? And so that's what they're going to look at. Now, what other questions are they going to ask? Are they going to ask, are efforts being made to individualize the hair? Um, is it possible to determine whether the hair came from a deceased person? Because the hair from somebody that's living and the hair from somebody deceased, the hair is going to look different. So how will we do that? Can we determine that? Can DNA individualize a human hair? So those are the things that they are going to look at. Now, with hair and DNA, um, they have made a lot of breakthroughs in the last few years um, when it comes to profiling. So you can detect DNA in hair roots. It can be examined in the anagen phase or early growth phase, as opposed to the catagen phase and the telogen phases. So with DNA now, they have really figured out how to identify hair at certain stages. So that's what they've done, and identifying it earlier most of the time is better. And so that's what they have really found out. Now, when hair is forcibly removed, though, when you forcefully remove hair, the problem is the tissue surrounding the hair shaft may be present. So they can tell whether or not removed by force or something else happened to it. And so that's a good indication right there. So don't let anybody fool you when it comes to certain things. Hair can be removed by certain forces. And if they do, that can tend to happen. Now, when they do that and they found out that if that is done, they can use that as a source or the main source of DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA can be extracted from the hair shaft. So that's one of the things that can be done. DNA can be extracted from the hair shaft. And so looking at that is one of those things that um, can be a main thing. So that's what can do. That's what they can look at. Now, why do we care about mitochondrial DNA? Now, mitochondrial DNA, by definition, is the cellular material outside of the nucleus, and is transmitted from mother to child. That is where when people go and they've been pregnant and they can get rid of their baby and all of that stuff, and they can find out from the mitochondrial DNA where this child actually have came from. And that's what they've been doing lately. So a lot of time people go and they get rid of babies, they kill the babies or whatever. Uh, you hear all kinds of crazy stuff. That's how they have been able to track down the mothers of the different babies. It's through DNA and the mitochondrial DNA because it's only passed from mother to child. So that's how they've been able to track most of those. Now, uh, it can be used to individualize hair, but it can provide hair comparison. but that's what they've been using. They've been using DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA, to find mothers who have abandoned their children and stuff, or have killed their kids. You know, right after they had the baby, they go put them somewhere, put them in a garbage bag, and put them in a dumpster or something. As a rule, all positive microscopic hair comparisons must be confirmed by DNA analysis. So you got to have the analysis of the DNA in order to do everything. Now, what about collection and preservation of the hair itself? Uh, you got to have hair from your head or pubic hair. And you got to have 25 full-length hairs from all areas of the scalp that would normally ensure a representative sampling of the hair. And oh goodness, that feels like that with her. But they said 25 full-length hairs from your head. 25 dozen full-length pubic hair should be covered the range of characteristics present in pubic hair. Now, they also collect hair samples from the victims of suspicious death during autopsy. So they do analyze hair. And you guys have heard that a lot on the different shows that they analyze the hair of their victims. So they do that as well. But 25 hair from your head or 25 dozen full-length pubic hairs, because mostly what they do now is they just tell you that when they take their hair samples, they basically shave. They do underarm and other places, so they just go ahead and shave you. All right, natural fibers. Now we'd have talked about hair. Now we're switching gears to fibers. There are different fibers. They can come from animal or plant sources. You got wool, you got mohair, cashmere, furs, you got cotton. So different types of fibers. You got man-made fibers as well, and that's a lot what we wear. You can get them from raw materials and natural materials. You got rayon, you got acetate material, triacetate, you know, synthetic fibers, synthetic chemicals, including nylons and polyester and acrylics. And one of the things that I was doing with my chem class that I hate that we didn't get a chance to do was actually make nylon rope in class. But we will get a chance to do it when we get back. Hopefully they didn't get a chance to do it this year, but next year we'll get a chance to do that and actually make some of these fibers in the lab. Acrylics as well. So some of those, I actually get my students a chance to make those in the lab. Now, synthetic fibers are composed of polymers or micromolecules, which are a large number of atoms, and they are arranged in repeating units known as monomers. And polymer chemistry is one of the things that I did for my research. So this is an area that when it comes to this and fibers, I really have a particular love for. Now, this right here shows you a monomer, and a monomer is just one unit. And when you talk about a polymer, it means many mers. That's what it actually means. Now, the molecule can contain several million monomers in there, or what people like to call it to keep it a little bit more concise is links. Now, starch, cellulose, those are natural fibers. They're considered polymers. They're carbohydrate polymers. They have a large number of repeating units or monomers in them. Now, we can also use fibers as evidence as well. Now, the quality of the fiber evidence depends on the ability of our forensic scientists or our criminalists to identify the origin of the fiber, or at least be able to narrow the possibilities to limited sources. So that's what we'll be able to do. Now, the examiner is presented with these fibers, and then they got to be fitted together at their torn edges, virtually, and you got to make sure they certain. Where do they come from? You can talk about different fibers that, most of the time they look at fibers that are coming from not only clothing, but also carpet and different things like that. You got to be able to fit those pieces together. Now, you got to be able to also compare them with standard reference fibers. Um, you look at the color and the diameter, and you have to use a comparison microscope. So not only with hair, you got to use the comparison microscope, you have to use a comparison microscope when it comes to fibers as well. Well, and that's a given. Now, other features that can be important to compare fibers are your lengthwise striations on the surface of the fibers, uh, the lustering patterns of particles that reduce the shine. Um, so, if you put a carpet cleaner on there, bleach, anything like that, and then looking at the cross-sectional shape of the fibers themselves, that can also help. Now, what else can be challenging with fiber evidence is basically you can deal with dyes that are applied to the fibers during manufacturing. So you can have different dyes, and then if you can identify this different particular dye or the color of that dye, that can also assist with identification. And then you can have different types of fibers. You can have round, you can have dumbbell, you can have flat, you can have multi-lobe, and you can just look at that when you're looking at different things like carpet, different type of rugs. They can have all different types of things like that. So you can really see that from different rugs and everything. Now, when it comes to fiber comparisons, you can use infrared spectroscopy to look at it, and infrared um, is pretty good, and that's a good method of looking at the classes of fibers. Now, the molecules that compose of a manufactured um, can absorb certain infrared lights. So even when it comes to that, looking at infrared and everything, um, one of the things that I tell my chemistry students, every element on the periodic table fluoresces or gives off light different. So um, it either can give off light different, it can also absorb light differently. And so that's one of the things that you can see here when it comes to fibers is how do it absorb light? And that's one of the things that you can really see, and that's why they use infrared in these cases. Now, you can have a traditional light microscope, you can have a spectrophotometer, and it allows the analyst to view an object under the microscope while getting the infrared pattern. Now, you can do both of those. And so that's one of the things that they really use. Now, it's very convenient. It's a good way for analysts to compare the colors of fibers through different types of patterns. So that's what you can see with that. Now, also with that, you can look at the dye too, and you can obtain that through chromatic separation. They can go through and actually take the dye and just like really like doing DNA and just really separate it out to see where that dye came from and what's in the dye. So they'll get down to doing this, and this is all like chemical analysis too. And so we use a lot of these infrared spectrometers and all of this stuff in doing chemical analysis as well. And so that's why a lot of time when you say a lot of people who go into criminology also have a good background in chemistry because you put those skills to good use. Now, synthetic fibers, double refraction or birefringent. You will see that when you're using a polarizing microscope. Now, it depends on the class of the fiber. Each polarizing plane of light will have a different type of characteristic with the index of refraction. And so that's why I'm saying every element on the periodic table, when you're making these different materials, they're going to absorb light different, they're going to refract differently, all of that. So they're going to give off certain characteristics. That is what's going to happen. Now, when the investigator, what they're going to do is they're going to look for strands of fibers, and what they're going to look at is, are those fibers carrying certain evidence, potential carriers? Now, articles of clothing, all of that stuff, they're going to pack it and put it in separate bags to make sure. If they're looking for gunpowder residue, blood, um, other type of stuff that is actually on the fabric of the materials themselves, that's what they're going to look for. And then you got to put that in separate bags so that they can examine each piece very closely. Now, if it's necessary to move a fiber from the object, what got to happen is the investigator got to remove it with these forceps, and they got to be removed carefully, placed on a sheet of paper. You got to fold and label the paper and place the paper packet inside another container. So you have the evidence, and then you have like your particular type of clothing. Then you take material from that clothing and you put it in something separate, in a separate container, because you have to say, not only did I use this piece of cloth for evidence, I took evidence from that, and it has to be packaged separately. That is all for chapter number 11. I am going to probably go ahead and get started on chapter 12. Hold on just a second. And I'm going to pull up chapter 12 real quick. Now, the reason why I want to get started with chapter 12, because chapter 12 is kind of a long chapter. So I'm going to start part of it, but I'm not going to finish all of it, because chapter 12 really deals with drugs and all types of drugs and everything like that. So we're going to get started, but we're not going to finish all of chapter 12. I'll finish the rest of chapter 12 on Wednesday. So let's get into chapter 12. Now, what about drugs and what are drugs? Now, drugs can be defined as a natural or synthetic substance that is used to produce psychological um, or physiological effects on humans or other high order animals. So that's what a drug is. Um, so that's the definition of it. But drugs are supposed to help you feel a certain way. So if you're sick, they're going to help you feel better. If you need sleep, help you sleep. All of these type of things. Now, when you talk about the drug behavior, it can come from two points of view: uh, physical dependence and psychological dependence. When it comes to different drugs. Now, this is the way we're going to look at it from human behavior. Now, when it comes to repeated drug use, usually you have psychological dependence for the continuous use of that drug. So you will have that and see that. Now, emotional factors do play a part in drug dependence. Personal characteristics of the user, um, expectation by the drug experience, society attitudes, um, possible responses, and the settings in which the drugs are used. So all of that play a main role when it comes to use of drugs. So all of that plays a factor. Why is that? Some people are, um, there's a lot of instances where they're scared, they're afraid of certain things, they've had certain things that have happened to them in the past, and then when they do that, they start using drugs. So the intensity of the psychological experience with a drug is difficult to define. But what about our main ones? Alcohol, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines. They could lead to a high degree of involvement, very high degree of involvement. Marijuana, codeine, they have a lower potential for abuse. Now, when it comes to certain things, a lot of things that people look at is what about alcohol abuse? And I know a lot of times alcohol abuse can be very dangerous because of the simple fact that you have a lot of people that go out, they drink, um, and some people say, yeah, I drink, they get a little buzz, but when you still driving drunk, even a buzz can really kill you, and get other people killed as well. So that's a lot of things. I mean, not having enough sleep and getting behind a wheel of a car can endanger somebody's life. So there are different things out there that can happen. And so they look at alcohol as one of the main factors. Now, what about physical dependence? Now, physical dependence is defined as the physiological need for the drug bought by regular use. The desire to avoid sickness, abstinence syndrome, cause physical addiction or dependence. Uh, Marijuana and cocaine are common drugs of abuse whose regular use does not lead to physical dependence. So marijuana, for instance, that's why a lot of people now are pushing for marijuana to be legal because of this main thing, and that even though it is that, um, but it can help in certain areas. A lot of people are using CBD drugs because it does help with pain and different things like that, and doctors out there have evidence that can support that. And so that's what they're looking at. Not cocaine, not so much, but that's what they're looking at mostly with marijuana usage. Now, you can have different types of drug classification. You can have narcotics, you can have depressants, you can have stimulants, and you can have hallucinogens. So stuff that can make you hallucinate. So, what fall in these categories? Uh, Narcotics. They can basically relieve pain by depressing action of the central nervous system. They have an effect on blood pressure, your pulse rate, and your breathing. So that's what can happen with a lot of narcotics. A lot of narcotics are for pain relief, but they can affect you when it comes to blood pressure, your pulse rate. That can affect that because a lot of time when people OD on narcotics, sometimes they can have elevated blood pressure and they can go into cardiac arrest. The regular use of narcotics can lead to physical dependence. Now, the most one that is out there now and is really taking over is opiates. Opium extracted from poppies. So that's the most common source of narcotic drugs, and that's the most common source of you see that affect heavy use nowadays is opioids, and we see that in our foster care system, and a lot of the parents they are using opioids, and so that's one of the things you see it carry over into other areas. Now, morphine is readily extracted from opium and used to synthesize heroin. Yeah, so what they did was uh, they made morphine as a way to really look at and to heal from different types of opium and stuff to make sure that, hey, people don't get addicted to the morphine. So they made heroin as a backup and ended up, people got addicted to the heroin as well. So that's what ended up happening. Uh, so what do addicts do? They dissolve the heroin in water by heating it in a spoon and then injecting it in the skin. Heroin produces this high, so it comes with drowsiness and a sense of well-being that lasts about 3 to 4 hours. Codeine is also present, but is usually prepared synthetically from morphine. Now, what about synthetic opiates not derived from opium? So this is where oxycodone come in. It got that active ingredient oxycodone, and it's not derived from opium or morphine, but it gives the same effect. So usually what they do is this is prescribed to patients that have chronic pain. So usually that's where the abuse come from there. So you got natural opiates and then you got synthetic opiates. And so that's the difference between the two. Methadone is another one. Now, it's related to heroin, and so what they do, they put people on that when they're coming off of their heroin and stuff. This is a substitute that they use when they're in rehab to get them to come out, and then it produces minimum side effects. Now, you can have depressants. Uh, it used to depress the functions of the central nervous system. Now, depressants comes irritability and anxiety, and that may induce sleep. So that's what it is. So a lot of people take sleeping pills to induce sleep. So they can include alcohol, uh, anti-anxiety drugs, stuff that can be sniffed. For example, glue, model cement, uh, aerosol propellants such as Freon. So you have people out there that will sniff those so that they could actually calm them down. And so that's what a lot of people do with that. Alcohol, or like I would like to call it, ethanol or ethyl alcohol, enter the body's bloodstream quickly, travels to the brain. It acts to suppress the brain control of the thought processes and muscle coordination. So you got barbiturates or downers. They're taken orally, and they create this feeling of well-being. They relax the body, and they produce sleep. So a lot of people take a lot of sleep aids in order to do that. Now, you got your anti-anxiety drugs. So that's what you got: Valium, Xanax. So, so those are different ones. They produce a relaxing effect. Now, sniffing different things give you exhilaration, but it impairs judgment, and it can cause liver, heart, brain damage, even death. And so people have done crazy things and sniffed all kinds of different stuff. Uh, then you got your stimulants. These are your amphetamines. They are uppers, speed, cocaine, which is in free base form, is known as crack. It They take that to keep you alert or keep you woke, followed by a decrease in fatigue and loss of appetite. So a lot of time when you see people who are on, um, they'll say crack cocaine, for instance, um, they don't sleep, um, they really jittery, and they don't eat. They lose a lot of weight. So when you got amphetamines and methamphetamines, they are often injected, um, and they cause an initial rush and an intense feeling of pressure. And then after that is followed by a period of exhaustion and a prolonged period of depression. So that's what happens when people take um, methamphetamines. Now, where does cocaine come from? It's come from the leaves of ethoxylin cocoa, and it causes an increase in alertness, vigor, and and then it suppresses hunger, fatigue, and boredom. That's what it does. Now, when it comes to crack, however, you take the cocaine and you mix it with baking soda and water, and then you heat it, and then it is often smoked in glass pipes, and it stimulates the brain pressure center. So that's what they do. They take it and mix it with baking soda and water, and then they heat it. Let's see, did I go to that? No. Okay. Now the other thing that you see is hallucinogens, and marijuana is the most widely used one of those. Um, it changes normal thought processes, but it changes your mood and your perceptions of different things. So it's most widely used. They trying to get medical marijuana now. for different things. So not so much. It's still illicit on some aspects of it, but not as much anymore. So a lot of people nowadays are trying to go to that for medical reasons. And the reason why is people are researching it and they don't know everything about this. Now, why do they care about this? So with this, um, they have THC in there, and that THC reduces the psychoactive effects experienced by users, and it's in the cannabis plant. And so that's what they look for, um, THC. And so that's the main thing. Now, when you look at the other oils and you see there's a lot of shops that sell the CBD oil. Now, the difference between the two is mainly that what they are looking at is they are trying to sell, they don't want to sell the THC part. Now, they can sell the oil with everything in it, but when it comes to THC, that's the main drug part that is in there that can't be in there. And so that's the big fight of, do some of the products have THC or not? And see where some people want to use it, and then if they go and get drug tested for their jobs, it'll show that they have some THC in their system from using these particular oils and different things. So marijuana comes from cannabis, the chemical substance for the properties, tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. The THC in cannabis varies in different parts of the plant. You find it in the resin, the flowers, the leaves, THC in the stem, roots, or seeds. It can be found in all parts. So it depends on uh, its decreasing. You find it in the resins, the flowers, the leaves, little THC in the stem, the roots, or the seeds. So it's there just in small amount. Now the THC rich resin is known as hashish, and marijuana does not cause physical dependency, but risk harm is heavy long-term use. So if you do long-term use that is very heavy, that's what they saying, that's where the harm actually comes in at. Now you got other ones that are out there. You got LSD, PCP, MD, MDA, and that's ecstasy. Now LSD is synthesized from lysergic acid, and it can cause hallucination that can last for 12 hours. PCP, synthesized from clandestine laboratories, and is often smoked, ingested, or sniffed. Doesn't matter, it can go all those ways. PCP and LSD is often mixed, and when you mix those two, that's where you get angel dust. And angel dust can be in a capsule or a tablet. When people take it, um, you got this strength that you're not vulnerable or anything like that, but it turns to depression. It has tendencies to go toward violence and to suicide. So you can have all of those. Now, I am going to stop right here. We will pick up the rest of this chapter on Wednesday. So we're going to stop here. That's why I said I wanted to get into chapter 12, because chapter 12 is a lot. It's about 80 slides. So I want to stop here, and then we'll finish up chapter number 12 and get into 13 next time. Questions or anything you guys may have, I'm going to record the video. So the video is recorded, and you guys, classmates, can be able to download these later. as far as your guys' test or next test, it's going to cover chapters 11, 12, uh, 13, and 14. I'm thinking just 4 chapters now per test. We may be able to squeeze in one more test. I'm going to see about that. Usually I was only doing 4, but what I may just do is we'll squeeze in this last test, and then all of the chapters can have quizzes for those chapters, and I'm going to probably leave it as such. Um, and then, like I said, I'll give you guys a study guide that have all the questions that's going to be on the final exam for you guys. So I make sure I get started on that. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good one, and I will talk to you guys later.